Are there any questions? I'm going to go first. Is there any questions in the virtual queue? See, I was being nice so that Mike wouldn't have to keep doing this kind of thing, you know, from that standpoint. Do you want me to step out of the picture? No. Oh, I'm not in the picture anyway, so that's okay.
Oh, good job.
Okay. Now you get to be put on the spot. Okay, since you have the microphone first, let me throw one out to you here. One of my questions here. One of the questions I was just asking from the standpoint of the actual breach, okay, the term breach, is Michigan, where are we looking at the pecking order out of the 50 states? Where are we as far as breach? Do you know if we're in the high end or low end as far as our clients? And the reason why, and then the follow-up question, see, I'm really getting good at this. The follow-up question is it because of the idea of the types of businesses that we have in the state, or is it because people don't have, you know, the protection?
You know, I think for Michigan, I don't know if it's necessarily one of the states we see a ton of incidents, but it's not necessarily neglected either. It's hard to put it state by state. We're more so focused on industry by industry that we tend to not necessarily see where the state or where each industry is located state-wise. But you know, there's a lot of automotive in Michigan, as you know, and factories, manufacturing is a big target. One of the reasons why manufacturing is such a big target is because a lot of manufacturing companies can't afford to be down for more than 24 or 48 hours, because if they are, their production stops, and that has a ripple effect on their revenue stream. So what that means is if they're impacted with ransomware, threat actor knows they're more likely to get paid quickly and at a higher rate because they want to get back up and running sooner. So I think having the automotive industry here and a lot of manufacturing companies here definitely can play a role in seeing more ransomware in Michigan. But truthfully, I've never really thought about it from that aspect. We see a ton. We have tons of clients that are in Michigan, but we also deal with clients that are nationwide as well. I think the moral of the story is no company in Michigan should feel some sort of safety net because they're in Michigan. No company, no company anywhere should really feel any type of safety net based on where they're located or their industry size, big or small, located in the heart of Manhattan or in a small, 5-mile town in northern Michigan. You still, in the eyes of a threat actor, are pretty equal.
Okay, good. We'll pass the mic to your left because it's a follow-up question on that same thing. Alex, if a company is breached, do they have to use the attorneys that Hylant suggests, or can they select their own attorneys, or is it mainly based on the idea of you put into the contract or whatever else that they have internal attorneys? How does that work?
I'll give it.
Before you answer, I want to let you know you're sitting right next to Kate. So just clarify that, okay?
So hopefully I won't get slapped, but I'll give a very attorney answer as it depends.
Good answer.
It really depends on the carrier that you're working with. It depends on the broker and the relationship that they have with the carriers. So I always encourage everyone that when you're going through that incident response plan, which should be a proactive approach that you take, is to know and identify who you want to work with, communicate that to your broker so we can negotiate it on the front end.
Okay.
There are some carriers out there that if you have an event and that's not been negotiated, you are in a box. You do have to work with the panel providers that they've provided and that they've negotiated their rates with, and if you go off of that, coverage can be watered down. But if you're proactive in nature, you should be able to work with who you want if it's agreed upon.
Okay, good. One of the things that I'll go back and look at that'll chime in to these other two gentlemen on the panel is the state of cyber attacks, security, whatever. Is it changing? I know there's more incidents and things like that, but what do you think has generated some of the change? Why it's on the rise?
That could be a whole, panel just on that question
Okay,
alone.
yeah. That's why I'm going to give them to have the opportunity. To
I think
respond.
when we go back, I think the start of COVID really started to trigger a downward spiral of cyber claims, just because people were rushing to work from home and we weren't prepared for something of that nature. I think
Okay.
that started it. Now I think insurance companies are very worried about the supply chain. What third parties are we using, and how can they affect thousands of companies at once rather than just targeting one company individually? And so then that parlays into the severity of these events and making sure we can bring that down to a more realistic number, and start paying them out under the retention, utilizing the resources the policies give us.
Okay. Knowing that hacking or whatever is on the rise, Draython, is hacking out of control? Are there new approaches or whatever else? I want both you and Steve to go ahead and respond to that. Don't hang Steve just because
I'd love to hang him.
It's okay, I got insurance.
An attorney? Is hacking out of control? I think hackers are growing because the underground has made it easier for the average person to become a hacker. There are kits available on the dark web where you could launch an attack by just downloading a file and then picking your target and then allowing that attack to basically automate the attack process. And some of these are getting very sophisticated. One particular ransomware group has gotten they market the fact that they encrypt files at the fastest rate in the market, and they do. They actually do. They are the fastest. They encrypt files so fast that IT or cybersecurity does not have time to respond. So if you get hit by this particular group,
So like the dominoes of
Yeah.
hackers, the 30 minutes or it's free.
yeah, exactly. So they attract a lot of people, and they promote themselves as the fastest encryptors in the market, and they are. So it's a combination of more opportunities because we've moved to this work from home environment. It's also hackers have gotten more sophisticated. They've gotten better. They've honed their craft. If you've noticed the emails you get today, you notice how the English has gotten better? The Nigerian prince kind of disappeared. So they're getting more sophisticated. They're getting smarter. Mm-hmm. They're constantly changing their tactics, so we're trying to do the same.
Okay. Comment, Steve?
I kind of support everything that Draython said. They are getting more sophisticated. They're targeting targeting key people in certain organizations, in certain industries. Some of this stuff is being leveraged as a mechanism for corporate espionage as well, where, let's say a competitor of Highland Insurance was trying to knock Highland off the internet for a couple days, and they gave Yuri some Bitcoin and told him to take care of it. He took care of it, and then they paid him. So these things happen. It's not just people trying to do bad things, right, to make money. It's also financially motivated from a business standpoint, and they're incentivized. Now there's people who are exploiting firmware. They're getting into the software at the hardware level so that when you reload a system or a machine or a server, they've infected the BIOS of that system, and they've breached the trust of that hardware. So that hardware, if it's used again, is just going to simply become another homing beacon and a command and control system for them once it's reinstated after the recovery. Mm-hmm. So, they're getting into whole new levels of attack levels that are just, it's a cat and mouse game, and unfortunately they have the money and the resources, and there's so many out there. As even a nation state actor, right? I mean, if I have the entire United States government saying we need to get something done, right? Here's a limited amount of money, it's going to happen. So this is exactly what's happening in these not so favorable countries.
Well, let me just ask you this, Steve. Keep the microphone for
Sure,
a second.
sure.
Don't get too excited about it, but what do you think the benefits are of cloud storage versus a company maintaining their own server, and does that act as a better defense from from hackers or whatever,
Yeah.
it's going.
I mean, as I mentioned previously, cloud means someone else's computer. So when these threat actors come in and paint the backups, they paint the laser on the backups and, send a nuke out there, they already have access to your environment. They already have access to sabotage your data, to encrypt your data, to delete your backups and your backup systems. As a cloud service provider, we are required to have a copy of that data, and we don't have any touch points back into their network. So our systems and the client systems that are potentially infected are completely separate. So there is no, local connection. There's no VPN. There's nothing that connects us once the data transfer is complete from the client side to our cloud. And most vendors that use enterprise backup software will architect it in this capability. So there is that zero trust. So nothing can crawl back the line and then encrypt whatever's on our end. And then as a cloud services provider, we also leverage certain features. For example, insider protection. In the event of a threat actor or an egregious employee who wants to get back at their employer, goes in and deletes the backups, right? If you're an IT administrator and you log into your backup console and say erase the backups, it's going to do what you tell it. It's going to erase the backups. And they also can do the same thing from the cloud repository side. So we have a little trick up our sleeves where we can present to the attacker or to the employee that the backups have actually been deleted, but really on our side, we have a recycling bin in which we hide that from the end user.
Okay.
And we've been successful in recovering a very large municipal client with this exact same mechanism, and the attackers or the hackers were the Black Matter ransomware group, and they were known to do a very thorough job on destroying any and all backup systems before they did their attack. It was actually the first vector they went for.
I have another question. I'll pass the mic over to Kate. Knowing that, we got to go around you, whatever. This is more trying to be able to say, hey, people want to say, hey, I don't need to worry about the idea of cybersecurity because I'm only doing third-party transactions and whatever else, and I don't really have to be concerned about it because I'm just taking a credit card because I'm actually providing a resale service to somebody else. And all of a sudden they think, well, since it's not me, but it's Amazon or something like that, how does that come into play from a legal standpoint?
So most companies are going to, or they should, have agreements in place with that specific third-party company, right? So they're not going to just hand over their data to someone that's processing unencrypted credit card information and housing that without having some sort of agreement in place that is going to lay out exactly what that third-party credit card processing company is going to have to do if they were impacted with an incident that turns out to be a breach. So even though, let's just use Amazon since that was the example that you gave, if they have a bunch of credit card information on Amazon customers, though it's not the third party's customers directly, if that third party is hit with a breach, they probably have some sort of contractual notification obligation to Amazon. Given just how large of a company Amazon is, I would imagine it's probably pretty strict. So it's probably something like 12 to 24 hours of notice that Amazon is going to want, whereas companies that aren't as sophisticated may not have it outlined. It may just be something a bit more vague. We want notice in the event of an incident or notice in the event of a breach, whereas more sophisticated companies that are entering into these agreements will have it lined out to the point where it can't be misinterpreted. It's not vague. It's pretty clear, in 12 hours from the detection of an incident, and lay out exactly how they define an incident, or in the event of a breach as defined under state law. So even though it's not the company's data,
right,
it's someone else's, they're still going to be on the hook if the agreement's in place to make sure they're doing right by that company.
So I would take it from that standpoint, no matter what the size of the company, whatever else, you should have an IR plan in place, even though if you think all the stuff that you're buying is third party or whatever else.
Right.
Because it could come back and ask for information, and then incorporating some type of liability if you don't have at least a plan in place.
And the thing is for those kinds of companies, it's important to have in that specific plan how you're going to communicate with that company during the incident. So the second you notify some company, hey, all that data we have on your customers may have been impacted in an incident, then company is not going to say, okay, thanks, just keep us posted. They're going to want updates. They're going to want to be in the business. They're going to want to know exactly what forensics is doing, who you have doing forensics, if they know their stuff. So you have to be prepared, those companies, to have the corporations, the data they're collecting on these corporations. They have to be prepared to have that company's lawyers, that company's forensic team, that company's insurance carrier, everyone in their business, because we're all waiting on the sidelines as this corporation to make sure nothing goes wrong with this, third-party entity.
Okay. Well, going on that same vein, pass that over to your friend to the left. Is there a particular, you got that, like a particular size of company that should have a cybersecurity policy, or does the size of the company reflect a relationship to the cost of it? And then after he answers that, I'm going to shut up and be sure that if you had any questions, because I could go ahead and pontificate for a long time. But anyway, so Alex, go ahead, think of your questions that you might have, and I'll turn it over to you guys.
I would say all sizes of companies should look into cyber insurance.
Okay.
Where there's no size of company that's immune to a cyber event and a cyber breach. If you have a bank account and you have an email address, you have a huge exposure. When we look at cyber insurance, everything's generated by that original revenue number. So how big are you from a revenue standpoint? That's where we start the premium conversation. And then based on your controls, that number goes up and down.
Okay.
Now, we look at it as, a small company, all right, a little bit more strapped for cash potentially. What do we look at for a cyber policy? I would say that a cyber policy is one of the most useful insurance policies you can buy, because we look at it in three manners. We look at it as the coverage, which is arguably what you're paying for. It's very important. But two, how good are the claims teams? So you can get a ton of resources inside those claims teams. And three, a lot of carriers are out here giving risk management tools that you can take advantage of for either free or a reduced cost. Things like external scans, things like incident response planning. Some even come with tabletops. So an insurance policy can be used in a number of different ways. I always say if myself or anyone at Hylant sells you a cyber policy and it goes on a shelf and gets dusty, we didn't do our job. There's a ton of resources that come with one that helps out those smaller companies get their bang for their buck.
Okay. Yeah. Questions out here? Yes, Nelda.
So I'm thinking about the clients that Business Board serves, and those are clients that are, fairly small, including home-based businesses. And so I'm wondering what type of affordable packages are there, and maybe even some freeware that's out there that can help those small businesses protect themselves.
Go ahead.
I think along those lines, when it comes to insurance carriers, there are insurance carriers that are tailored to big companies, and there's insurance companies that are tailored to smaller companies. So there's a lot of tag on and a lot of endorsements for, those business owners' policies that we can throw some cyber on to protect and just give a little bit of that protection. For those smaller individual companies, we try to tailor that coverage to them specifically so they're not getting, multiple $1 million of limits. We tailor the policies to those, and there's certain carriers out there that cater to small to mid-sized businesses. So it's just a matter of doing that research and finding the carrier that's fit for what you're looking for.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
Not only the insurance piece of it, but also the cybersecurity protection that
Go ahead. That comes back to you.
So Nilda, it sounds like you're asking what can small businesses do when they may not have a budget to afford a full-scale cybersecurity program? Yes. So there are always some basic things that anyone can do. We've heard the term multi-factor authentication. Put it on everything. Put it on everything. Especially, remember, the key things that hackers want to get control of your environment, your phone and your email, and your computer. Nobody's going to call you from Amazon and ask to log into your computer. No one's going to call you from Microsoft and ask you to log in your computer. No one's going to call you from your bank. Has anyone ever received a legitimate call from their bank to log in their computer? It's not going to. Oh, you have.
It's not right.
From the fraud department, yes. So those sort of things you can do. Get away from passwords if you can. Use Google Authenticator or use a YubiKey. You can look those up. Use LastPass, which rotates your password. I use different passwords for everything. So if someone hacks one of my items, they're only going to get to that one item. They're not going to get access to all my other things because the passwords to all my other things are nothing similar to the first one. Use biometrics. Use your face. Use your fingerprint. Use your retinal scans. Use things that are about you that are unique. And that way you make yourself more secure. And yes, is it inconvenient sometimes? Yes, it is. But look at what you're protecting. Mm-hmm. Teach your children how to do the same. Sure. And tell them why. So it's just a matter of changing that culture. So yes, there are things that we can do at home personally. Majority of homes don't have a firewall, and that's normal, unfortunately. Maybe you can talk to an IT company and see if they have a low-cost program for a firewall, especially if you are an executive or business owner. How many of us have kids or spouses that are on the same network as our business computer?
You don't have to answer that. Just think about it.
How many have kids that get into stuff and download stuff they shouldn't? I've got teenagers. I know. They probably no kidding. It's probably true. Yeah. Especially maybe my son. Yeah. But kids get into stuff. Our spouses sometimes, men or women, sometimes aren't as savvy in cybersecurity as we are because at work you hear it all the time. But you go home and you relax and you're like, oh God, I'm at home. I don't have to deal with this stuff anymore. Don't relax when you're at home. Be vigilant while you're at home too.
Okay. Who had a question over here? I saw a hand out of this.
So we talk a lot about cybersecurity insurance for companies. Should an IT professional think about having a personal cybersecurity policy for liability or misconfigurations, that sort of thing, like a doctor has malpractice?
Oh, sorry. That's a great question, and the answer is absolutely yes. So a lot of times when you're in the cybersecurity field or you're in the software field, we add what we call professional coverage. Typically that's known as technology errors and omissions. So that's going to help you for if you miscode something or if your software doesn't work the way that it should and it causes other people financial harm. So the answer is yes. There's policies, there's carriers out there that specialize in that. We call it professional coverage, whether it's miscellaneous professional or technology errors and omissions.
Is there one specific for technology, like in the field? Or?
Yes, so there is one specific, and we very widely brand it Tech-E&O, so technology errors and omissions. Now that's when we start to get into the weeds of a cyber insurance policy and a Tech-E&O policy where we start pulling in definitions and we want to make sure the definition of what your service is on the policy so that's actually covered. So that's where a broker really comes in and says, all right, let's break down your day-to-day, what are you doing? Is there any outlying activities? And make sure that definition is to a T what you're doing, and you'll be safe.
I have I preface this because I am a local politician, so I'm going to preface this next question. It has nothing to do with that. It says, what do you think will be the impact of the recession on cybersecurity? Loaded question. Who wants to answer that?
So for me, I think from an insurance perspective, I don't think it's going to have any impact on the pricing of coverage. I don't think it's going to have any impact on how much coverage is out there. I do worry about is there a constraint on the budget? Does that affect the IT teams? And does it affect if we deploy the newest patching cadence or the newest PAM tool or the newest SOC that's out there? That's what worries me from a recession standpoint.
What do you think, Kate?
I think with a recession comes people making budget cuts, right? As Alex said, so people may be saying, okay, we have never been hit with an incident. We don't need cyber liability
Exactly.
insurance, and
That's
writing
what-
that
that's-
out.
that's what I'm thinking
Yeah,
about.
writing that out of their budget, or maybe they keep the insurance, but they decide to go with a cheaper rates, have less coverage, or have an extremely high deductible, possibly canceling their employee training seminar they may have coming up because it's just not in the budget anymore, cutting the cybersecurity budget, not taking time to work on the proactive measures, not taking time to develop an incident response plan and test that because it is going to be costly. But I think that's the biggest impact that I could see happening. And, despite a recession, if one is around the corner, ransomware and business email compromises will not stop. So don't cut your budget there.
I mean, if a recession is here, which way I think it is, my opinion, but people are trying to be able to do some type of recovery. And just as they're trying to recover cost or whatever else, that they can go ahead and add revenue to the bottom line. And if they see all of a sudden this is an opportunity, trust me, people will try to find a way. What's your comment, Steve?
I mean, it was all pretty much covered well. Maybe with like software renewals, security packages, maybe some of these business decisions would be, deferred until an improved economic situation. But like, I feel that there's other areas where you can safely cut things, right? Like eliminate the Grubhub fund or the coffee fund, because I actually had a conversation with a customer who I told them that their coffee delivery was more expensive than offsite backup service, right? I'm like, and which one's gonna save you when you get ransomware, right? You're gonna just drink a whole bunch of coffee? I love coffee, but I'd rather switch to tea if I can keep my business, right? So that's basically it. I mean, the right decisions need to be made when it comes to cutting things, and there's other areas that you can compromise. Just don't do it on security, and don't do it on your backups.
Draython, I'll give you the last word of response to that, because I think it's an important question.
Groups like Lapsus, groups like Cozy Bear, these terms you may or may not know, these are threat actors from around the world. Most of them are supported by governments. They don't take off during a recession. If you cut your budget in cybersecurity, you make yourself an easier target. So unfortunately, you can't afford. The last thing you want to do is put yourself out of business by getting an incident that turns into a breach because you cut the budget in something that made it easier for them to get into your information. So a recession is the wrong time to reduce costs in cybersecurity. You want to maybe get more strategic about what you're doing and look if there are ways that you can. One way that I know that occurs is consolidating your vendors. So maybe there's a vendor that offers, maybe you have 10 vendors in cybersecurity, maybe you can reduce those to 5 and reduce costs that way, but still get the same value. There are ways of still getting what you want during a recession without having to cut it.
Kate, I have a question to you. Is it legal to go ahead and pay a ransom? And then the follow-up question would be like, if you're paying a ransom to and I'm using this generally, as a terrorist or whatever, what impact does that have on you after you paid it if the federal government decides to do something?
So is it legal? I'm going to do a yes and no. So if you are a private company, it is legal so long as you do an OFAC check. So that's just making sure that the threat actor, that's the term we typically use, that you are paying is not a sanctioned entity by the U.S. government. So there's a check that the negotiator that will use, or the company that may help facilitate the payment, that they will run to make sure that they don't come up as a sanctioned entity. If they are not sanctioned, it's legal. Now, as I had mentioned in my presentation, North Carolina and Florida now have laws out there that state agencies, public companies, government agencies cannot negotiate and cannot pay ransom. So if you're talking public schools, public hospitals, municipalities, cities. So for them, it is now illegal in those states. New York and Pennsylvania are currently discussing similar legislation. So could be the same for those states as well. Now, the impact that it may have, it depends. Some companies we work with have a hardline rule. We're not paying criminals, and it's, we're not going to negotiate. We're not going to pay. Other companies, they're just trying to do whatever they can to keep their head above water. So whether that means they're paying for the decryption key, they probably feel pretty good about that decision, because if they didn't pay, it's very likely they either lost years and years of data or they could have gone out of business. So as much as it may have hurt to make that payment, they're still in business and they have their data back. So they probably feel like it was the right thing to do. Other organizations who were able to, completely recover because they had great backups in place, their backups weren't impacted. They don't need to pay the threat actor for a decryptor key at that point, but they may still choose to pay the pay the threat actor to not leak the data, right? So there's multiple ways the threat actor will extort companies. One is pay me and we'll unlock your data and you'll have it back. The other is don't pay us and we're going to release all this information we stole from you on the dark web, and we're going to do it, in 72 hours or whatever deadline they may give you. And although, the average Joe doesn't troll the dark web, there are specific media outlets out there that do. So it does make its way into headline media if data's leaked. So a lot of companies make the decision to pay from a reputational standpoint. We always caution them that from a legal perspective, you can pay, sure, and maybe, we've worked with this threat actor before. We know that they have not posted when people do pay them, but we don't know what they're doing behind the scenes, right? Just because they're not posting it on their leak site doesn't mean they're not giving it to someone, doesn't mean it may not surface 10 years from now. At the end of the day, these are criminals, right? So we can only take them with a grain of salt. We can't trust them completely, despite how they try and convince us that, they're businessmen. I think in those situations, I think companies may always be waiting for the other foot to drop, right? Is this going to end up being posted in 10 years? But at the end of the day, whether you pay, whether you don't pay, you still have to notify.
Right.
You can't pay your way out of your legal obligation to issue notice.
And I think one of the things that's also very key, and that's why you need to work with your partners and everything else from the standpoint of being able to know what the backup situation is for your managed service provider or your cloud provider, so they can be able to share with you. And that should be a part of like what we do with our clients as far as quarterly business reviews, to be able to say, okay, fine, this is what's happening. This is the time that we go ahead and sit down with you and find out the recovery or what the aspect is. So those are all the things that you as a business need to be sure that you ask, your partners. So that way you'll have that action plan to be able to do that. Last question, yes?
So there's no law requiring employers to mandate biometrics being used that I'm aware of, but there are certain laws about the handling of biometrics if they are going to be used by employers. Mainly making sure employees are aware that it's being used, how it's being stored and handled, and that goes beyond just employees, it goes for consumers as well. So that will vary by state, whatever consumer protection law is in place for that particular state, and if it covers biometrics.
Okay.
But biometrics is PII in some states, so if it falls into the wrong hands, it is going to trigger a notification obligation.
Okay, you can have last word, Alex, because I'm getting thirsty, and that
just
liquor's
add-
over there for me.
I'll add one thing. Biometric exclusions are a real thing in the cyber insurance world. So if you're going to start taking biometrics and you're going to go that route, you really need to make sure if you have a policy, you're trying to get that endorsement, that exclusion taken out of the policy. So if there was a breach of that, it would be covered.
Okay. Well, I want to go ahead and thank our panel for excellent response to all the questions. Again, thank you guys.